Let's start with a set of numbers that might change how you think about the produce aisle. There are 14 clinical trials. They included 836 patients. The results showed that fasting blood sugar dropped by an average of 23 milligrams per deciliter. In some of those studies, the drop was closer to 40. Now, you might expect me to be talking about a new drug, but this wasn't from a $400 a month injection, and it wasn't from anything your endocrinologist has ever written on a prescription pad. It came from a vegetable. One vegetable that costs 67 cents a pound at a Walmart in Ohio and 49 cents at an Aldi in Texas. Less than a bottle of water at most American gas stations. And the research on this vegetable isn't hidden in some obscure journal nobody reads. It's in Acta Diabetica. It's in Frontiers in Nutrition. It's in phytotherapy research, with studies published as recently as 2025. These are randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, the gold standard of evidence. So here's the question I want to spend the next several minutes answering with evidence. Why has nobody told you about this? Why has your endocrinologist, the one you see every 3 months, who adjusts your metformin, who checks your A1C, who knows that insulin resistance is destroying your body from the inside out, never once said the word I'm about to say? I wish the answer were complicated. I wish there was a scientific debate or some legitimate reason to dismiss it. But there isn't. The reason is simple, and it's the same reason it always is. You can't patent a vegetable. I want to be clear about who this information is for. It's for the person who has been on metformin for 3, 5, even 10 years, and their A1C is still creeping up. Their doctor keeps adding medications, first metformin, then a sulfonylurea, then maybe an SGLT2 inhibitor, and now they're talking about a GLP-1 agonist that costs $300 a month. Each drug addresses one piece of the puzzle, but the puzzle keeps getting bigger. It's for the person who checks their fasting glucose every morning and sees a number they don't understand. They ate right the day before, they walked after dinner, they avoided the bread, and still the morning number is a 140, 150, 160. Nobody can explain why. It's for the person who has asked their doctor, maybe more than once, if there's anything they can do with food to actually fix this. And the doctor said, eat more vegetables without naming a single one that has been clinically proven to improve insulin resistance in randomized human trials. Today, I'm naming one backed by 14 of those trials. The vegetable is okra. And I know some of you just rolled your eyes. You're thinking, really? That slimy thing, that's the big reveal? Yes, that's the big reveal. And the fact that you just dismissed it, that your brain immediately categorized it as a throwaway side dish from your grandmother's kitchen, that reaction is not an accident. It's the result of a century where nutritional science has been relegated to the back of the room while pharmaceutical interventions get the stage, the microphone, and the spotlight. So let me reframe this for you. We're not talking about a side dish today. We're putting insulin resistance on trial, and okra is the key witness. Here's the charge. Insulin resistance, the metabolic condition that affects an estimated 40% of American adults and over 80% of people with type 2 diabetes, has been treated primarily with medications for the last 4 decades. Each of those medications costs between $30 and $300 a month. Each has a side effect profile. Each treats the downstream consequences of insulin resistance without reversing the upstream cause. Meanwhile, sitting in the produce aisle of every grocery store in America for less than $1 a pound is a vegetable that 14 randomized controlled trials say reverses insulin resistance through at least 4 independent mechanisms. Mechanisms that no single pharmaceutical drug can match simultaneously. And nobody told you that. That's the charge. To understand why this matters, we have to understand what insulin resistance actually is. Most people, even most diabetics, have a vague understanding at best. And that vagueness is what allows the pharmaceutical industry to sell you solutions you don't fully grasp. Insulin resistance is not diabetes. It's the condition that precedes diabetes, and it's the condition that continues driving damage even after diabetes is diagnosed and treated. Here's what happens inside your body. You eat food, carbohydrates break down into glucose, glucose enters your bloodstream, and your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin is like a key that fits into a lock called an insulin receptor on the surface of your muscle, liver, and fat cells. When the key turns, the cell opens a door, glucose enters, and blood sugar drops. Now imagine that lock starts rusting, corroding, stiffening. The key still fits, but it has to turn harder. Your pancreas compensates by making more keys, more insulin. For a while, it works. Blood sugar stays normal. Your doctor says you're fine. But behind the scenes, your pancreas is exhausting itself, producing 2, 3, even 5 times the normal amount of insulin just to keep the door open. That's insulin resistance. The locks are broken, the key factory is burning out, and your blood sugar, the number your doctor checks, looks normal right up until the moment it doesn't. And here's the kicker. While all of this is happening silently, while your pancreas is working overtime and your insulin levels are sky high, that excess insulin is doing its own damage. It's promoting inflammation, raising blood pressure, increasing fat storage around your liver and organs, accelerating atherosclerosis, and even feeding cancer cell growth. Insulin resistance isn't just a blood sugar problem. It's a whole-body metabolic crisis hiding behind a normal-looking glucose number. The standard treatment, metformin, primarily works by reducing how much glucose your liver releases. It doesn't repair the locks. It doesn't reduce the insulin overproduction. It manages one downstream consequence while the upstream machinery continues to break down. That's why okra's 4 mechanisms matter. Unlike any single pharmaceutical, it addresses the problem at 4 different levels simultaneously. It slows glucose entry, it blocks the enzymes that accelerate sugar breakdown, it supports the repair of the beta cells producing insulin, and it reduces the inflammatory environment that's corroding the locks in the first place. No drug does all 4. Okra does all 4, and it costs less than the gas to drive to the pharmacy. Let's start with what we know from published, peer-reviewed, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials. The largest and most recent meta-analysis was published in Experimental Physiology in 2025. It pulled together 14 randomized controlled trials with 836 patients and found that okra supplementation produced statistically significant reductions in fasting blood sugar, postprandial glucose, hemoglobin A1C, HOMOS-IR, the gold standard measurement of insulin resistance, and LDL cholesterol. Let's break those numbers down. Fasting blood sugar dropped by an average of 23.66 mg/dL. For reference, metformin, the first-line medication prescribed to virtually every type 2 diabetic in America, typically reduces fasting blood sugar by 25 to 30 mg/dL. Okra delivered roughly 80% of metformin's effect from a vegetable. Postprandial glucose, your blood sugar after a meal, that spike that does the real damage, dropped by 22.39 mg/dL. That spike is what scratches your blood vessel walls and feeds the age formation pathway. Okra blunted it by over 20 points. A1C dropped by 0.30%. On its own, that sounds small, but here's the context that changes everything. Every 1% drop in A1C reduces the risk of microvascular complications, eye damage, kidney damage, nerve damage by approximately 37%. So a 0.30% drop from adding a vegetable represents roughly an 11% reduction in your risk of going blind from diabetes, from a food, a separate 2023 double-blind trial out of Iran, published in Acta Diabetica, tested this more aggressively. 100 patients with type 2 diabetes were randomized to either 3,000 millesimoles of powdered okra daily or a placebo. Both groups continued their standard medications, metformin and gliclazide, and followed the same nutritional regimen. After 3 months, the okra group showed significant decreases in fasting blood sugar, A1C, total cholesterol, triglycerides, and C-reactive protein, a marker of systemic inflammation. The control group showed no meaningful change in any of those markers. The detail that jumped off the page for me was the C-reactive protein drop. Elevated CRP in a diabetic patient means your body is in a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation. That inflammation is actively worsening your insulin resistance and accelerating damage to your blood vessels, and okra reduced it measurably in a controlled trial on top of medication that was already being taken. Another trial published in Phytotherapy Research in 2022 took 60 type 2 diabetics and randomized them to okra extract or placebo for 8 weeks. This study found significant reductions in fasting blood sugar and improvements in insulin sensitivity, as measured by HOMA-IR. Let me explain HOMA-IR for a moment, because it's the number that matters most for this conversation. Your doctor probably checks your fasting glucose and your A1C, those are important. But HOMA-IR measures something deeper. It calculates how resistant your cells are to insulin. You can have a decent fasting glucose and a reasonable A1C and still have terrible insulin resistance. That means your pancreas is working overtime to keep those numbers looking acceptable. It's compensating, masking. Eventually it can't compensate anymore, and that's when the numbers collapse. HOMA-IR catches the problem before the collapse. In the 2025 meta-analysis, HOMA-IR dropped by 0.59 units in the okra group, a statistically significant improvement in the fundamental metabolic dysfunction driving type 2 diabetes. Now here's what I keep coming back to. Every single one of these trials reported that okra was safe. No adverse effects on liver function, kidney function, or blood pressure. Compare that to the side effect profile of any diabetes medication you care to name. The numbers are convincing, but numbers without mechanism are just correlation. So let me walk you through the 4 ways okra reverses insulin resistance. This isn't one trick, it's 4 simultaneous interventions happening from a single food. Most drugs hit one target, okra hits 4. Mechanism 1, the glucose absorption brake. When you eat okra, you're consuming one of the most mucilaginous vegetables on the planet. That slime, the stuff that makes some people wrinkle their nose and say, "I can't eat that," that's the medicine. That viscosity is the active ingredient. You're literally looking at the therapeutic compound and going, "No thanks." Okra's mucilage is composed primarily of a polysaccharide called rhamnogalacturonan. When this mucilage reaches your small intestine, it forms a viscous gel layer along the intestinal wall, a physical barrier. This gel slows the rate at which glucose molecules can cross into your bloodstream. Instead of a blood sugar spike that looks like a cliff, straight up, straight down, you get a gentle wave. Your pancreas can handle a gentle wave. It was designed for gentle waves. It cannot handle cliffs, not with beta cells that are already compromised. This mechanism alone reduces postprandial glucose by 15 to 22 gmHDL, and it works with every single meal where okra is present. Mechanism 2, the alpha-glucosidase blocker. Okra contains compounds, primarily isoquercetin and quercetin, 3-gentiabioside, that inhibit alpha-glucosidase, an enzyme in your gut lining that breaks complex carbohydrates down into simple sugars. When you inhibit this enzyme, the carbohydrates you eat get broken down slower, and the sugar molecules are released more gradually. There's a prescription drug that does the same thing, acarbose, which costs about $90 a month and causes bloating, gas, and diarrhea in roughly 30% of patients. Okra does it naturally with multiple compounds working in concert, and the clinical trials report 0 gastrointestinal side effects at the doses tested. Mechanism 3, the beta cell regenerator. This is the one that stopped me. Okra polysaccharides have been shown in both animal models and preliminary human data to stimulate the regeneration of pancreatic beta cells, the cells that produce insulin, the cells that type 2 diabetes slowly destroys over years and decades. The mechanism involves upregulation of a pathway called PPAR-gamma, a master switch. When activated, it does two things simultaneously. It improves insulin sensitivity in your peripheral tissues, and it promotes the repair and regeneration of beta cell function. There's a drug that targets PPAR-gamma, pioglitazone. It costs about $120 a month, and its side effects include weight gain, fluid retention, increased fracture risk, and in some populations, bladder cancer concerns. Okra activates the same pathway through food. Mechanism 4, the antioxidant shield. Insulin resistance doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a storm of oxidative stress. Reactive oxygen species damage the insulin receptors on your cell surfaces. They damage the beta cells in your pancreas, and they damage the blood vessels that carry glucose to your tissues. Okra is remarkably rich in antioxidant compounds, flavonoids, quercetin, polyphenols, vitamins A and C, and a compound called protocatechuic acid that has been specifically shown to reduce inflammatory cytokines. The 2023 double-blind trial measured CRP and found it significantly lower in the okra group after 12 weeks. The background fire that's accelerating your insulin resistance, okra, is dampening it enough to show up on a blood test. 4 mechanisms working simultaneously from one vegetable: defense, enzymatic regulation, cellular repair, inflammation control. Show me a single diabetes drug that does all 4 at any price. So if the evidence is this strong, if 14 trials across 3 continents say it works, if the mechanisms are understood, published, and reproduced, why has your doctor never mentioned it? The answer has layers. The first layer is economic. There is no pharmaceutical company that can profit from okra. It grows in the ground. It can't be patented. There's no formulation to protect, no exclusive manufacturing rights, no sales force, no drug representatives walking into endocrinology practices with samples and slide decks. The entire infrastructure of how medical information reaches your doctor is funded by companies that sell products. Okra is not a product, it's a food. The second layer is educational. Your doctor was trained in medical school and residency to manage insulin resistance with pharmaceutical interventions. That's not a criticism, it's a description of the curriculum. Nutritional science, when it's taught at all, typically occupies fewer than 25 hours across 4 years of training. There is no lecture on okra. There is no module on the PPAR, gamma activation potential of dietary polysaccharides. The system that trained your doctor filtered this research out before it ever reached their desk. The third layer is cultural. There's an unconscious institutional bias that anything coming from the produce section can't possibly be as effective as something coming from a pharmacy. We've been trained to think of food as enjoyable, necessary, cultural, but not therapeutic. And that bias has cost millions of people the chance to add a 67-cent per pound vegetable to their plate alongside their medication and see measurably better results. That's not conspiracy. It's infrastructure, it's incentive, it's inertia. And breaking through it requires you to bring the evidence to your doctor yourself. Let me put some numbers on the table to drive this point home. The global diabetes drug market is worth $67 billion annually. The top-selling diabetes medication in America, semaglutide, costs approximately $1,300 a month out of pocket. A 3-month supply of okra powder capsules at the dose used in the clinical trials costs about $36. Both lower blood sugar, both improve metabolic markers. One has a multi-billion-dollar marketing apparatus behind it. The other grows in a garden. Now, I'm not saying they're equivalent. They're not. Semaglutide works through a different mechanism and has stronger effects on weight loss and cardiovascular outcomes in high-risk populations. I respect the science behind it, but the question I keep asking, the question nobody in the medical establishment seems to want to engage with, is why okra isn't even part of the conversation, why it's not mentioned as an adjunct, why 14 RCTs get zero airtime, while one GLP-1 agonist gets a Super Bowl commercial. The answer isn't science, the answer is money. So let me show you exactly how to use okra. Knowing that it works is useless if you don't know how to use it. Method 1. Okrawater. This is the simplest entry point. Take 2 to 3 fresh okra pods. Cut the ends off, slice them lengthwise to expose the mucilage. Drop them into a glass of room temperature water and let it sit overnight, 8 to 12 hours. In the morning, drink the water. Don't heat it, don't blend it, just drink. The mucilage and water-soluble polyphenols leach into the water overnight. Drink this 20 to 30 minutes before breakfast on an empty stomach every morning. Method 2. Cooked okra before or with meals. A reasonable serving is about 100 grams, roughly 6 to 8 medium pods. Sauté them in olive oil with garlic and a pinch of turmeric. Eat it at the start of your meal before the carbohydrate hits your system. If you eat okra after the carbs, the mucilage is chasing glucose that's already being absorbed. If you eat it before or alongside the carbs, the gel has time to form before the glucose arrives. Method 3. Okra powder. This is the clinical trial approach. Dried okra pods ground into a fine powder and encapsulated. The dosage range in the positive clinical trials was 1,000 to 3,000 Insulin per day, split across meals. Here's a 21-day approach based on what the research supports. For the first week, use okra water only. Every night, prepare your pods, let them steep and drink the water before breakfast. Check your fasting glucose every morning and write it down. For the second week, add cooked okra at dinner. Eat it before your main carbohydrate source. Start checking your 2-hour postprandial glucose after dinner. For the third week, if you want the clinical trial level effect, add okra powder capsules, 1,000 ml with breakfast and 1,000 ml with dinner. By day 21, you'll have 3 weeks of glucose data. If your fasting glucose has dropped by 10 or more mg/dl consistently, that's a clinically meaningful response. If your postprandial numbers are 15 to 20 points lower, that's your intestinal mucilage working. When you talk to your doctor, don't say, "I saw a YouTube video about okra." Say, "I've been reviewing recent meta-analyses on Abelmoschus esculentus and its effect on HOMA-IR and HbA1c in type 2 diabetics. There were 14 RCTs. I'd like to add it as a dietary adjunct and track my metabolic response." That's a different conversation. A few important warnings. First, okra can interact with metformin absorption. Both work in the gut. To avoid any delay in absorption, take your metformin 30 minutes before or 2 hours after your okra water. Second, if you're on medications that can cause hypoglycemia, like sulfonylureas, adding okra requires monitoring. You're now lowering blood sugar from 2 directions. If you start seeing readings below 70, contact your doctor. You may need a medication dose reduction. Third, do not use okra as a reason to abandon glycemic discipline. Okra works best on top of a controlled carbohydrate diet. It's a tool, not an excuse. Everything I've covered today deals with the daytime, the meals, the glucose response. But insulin resistance doesn't pause at night. It intensifies between 2 and 4 in the morning. Your liver releases glucose, your cortisol rises, and your cells become even more resistant than they are during the day. That overnight window is where most of the silent damage happens. Here's what I want to leave you with. The evidence is there. 14 randomized controlled trials, published in mainstream journals, accessible to every physician with a PubMed account. And chances are, not one of your doctors brought it up. That's not a reflection on your doctor personally. It's a reflection on a system that filters out anything that can't be patented. If this information reached you today and it meant something to you, I need you to do one thing. Send it to one person in your life who's managing blood sugar, who's frustrated, who's tired of adding medications without understanding why the problem isn't getting better. Because the truth is, we don't have a marketing department, we don't have drug reps, we don't have a Super Bowl commercial. We have a share button and we have the truth. And that's how this information moves. One person at a time, across kitchen tables, between friends, inside families.